Okay, so we started last time, which is ages ago, this topic of um, human exceptionalism. Are we alone? Right? Uh, this notion of are there is there intelligent life out there? So I sometimes wonder if there's intelligent life down here. So life I know, but I'm not sure about the intelligent life. That's a little cynicism there for the morning. Now, what I'd like to do is do a quick review of what we did last time and then go on. I divided this topic into two parts. One of them is, are there any texts which seem to reflect one way or the other the existence of intelligent life on other planets? Uh, that's the first half of the analysis. The second half of the analysis deals more philosophically with the notion of human exceptionalism. We tend to think of ourselves as the purpose of creation. We're the crown of creation. God creates for 6 days, and then the very last thing that God creates is the human being. And the purpose of creation is somehow for us. And that, I hope you can see, relates to the notion of could there be intelligent life on other planets? Because that does seem to impinge upon the notion of human beings as being the purpose, the end all and be all of creation. If you say that there are intelligent beings in other dimensions, other planets, etc. So we'll deal first with the textual part.
We could believe it to be a center of creation in this realm, not in other realms.
Okay, so I hear exactly what you're saying, even though that's a little bit hard to digest fully, because if you feel that we are the end all in be all of creation, to say that, well, there are other intelligent beings, perhaps even more intelligent than you, but they're in other dimensions. That you are the crown of creation in this dimension. I mean, that to me is not so consoling. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and
No, but we know about angels and we know about other entities already that were created.
yeah, except for we'd have to decide whether they are somehow, does that threaten our being exceptional or not? It may not. It could be the angels are there just for us. Okay, so we'll get to that. So that philosophical question I'd like to wait on. But I just want to,
Just
yeah.
another question here. Are we saying that there's nothing that can occur in our world, scientifically speaking, that Chazal doesn't know about? And therefore, there's no comment that there's nothing that we could discover in the future, whether medical, science, space travel, anything, because it's not referred to in Chazal, it's as if it didn't exist.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. In other words, let's say you find a passage in the Talmud, let's just say, that seems to preclude the possibility of life on other planets. I mean, could it be that they just didn't have the scientific knowledge and technology to be able to detect life on other planets, or even to perceive the scientific possibility of such a thing? Is that a problem? So I would say that to the extent that the issue is not of profound significance, it's not a problem. So, you know, there's an issue of certain bugs on Shabbat that Chazal said are not really alive. You could kill them. So they clearly didn't seem to understand biology the same way we do, but it's not an earth-shattering issue. However, whether or not we are the purpose of creation and our significance in the order of things, I would say that it's a pretty profound issue. And therefore, I would be loath to challenge the view of Chazal as due to their lack of scientific expertise on an issue which has profound philosophical and theological significance. I know that's not a, yeah.
Yeah, that's an answer to the degree. I mean, but if the fact is that they only had limited information, that's our problem. That's not their problem. I mean, to say, well, there's a profound conclusion from certain situations,
yeah,
doesn't mean it's not true.
Okay, I understand. What you're suggesting is the following. See, we look to Chazal as not just your local Orthodox rabbi. Much of Jewish theology is based upon Chazal. And if we were to suggest that major pillars of Jewish theology are a function of their limited knowledge of science and technology, that's scary. That's a scary proposition.
Well, that's why the church burned people at the stake. If they didn't like everyone against church theology, they simply shut them up one way or the other. But
Yeah.
that doesn't get around the fact.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's just a
Yeah.
fact.
Okay. So, I mean, we'll discuss that when we get there. However, I just want to say that, I mean, so far we're not burning anybody at the stake, but I think I would just like you to appreciate at least that if we view Chazal as being a kind of almost an absolute embodiment of authentic Jewish theology, so to challenge those pillars of Jewish theology based upon lack of expertise in a certain science, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it really opens up a can of worms that is extremely problematic. So then what are we to believe? Right. So I'm not saying that's not necessarily reason to think it's not true. It just shakes the. You'll see Rav Kook is going to actually deal with this in a very frontal way. So just hang on to that issue. It's a really fascinating issue. We'll get to it. But I just want to do a quick review of are there any texts which seem to indicate yes or no that there is extraterrestrial life? Again, we're not pushing philosophically for the first part. The philosophical issues will be second part. Okay, so we saw last time a passage from. We're going to start with mysticism, Tikkunei Zohar, in which, and we'll just read it real quickly. Sovereign of the worlds, you are the cause of all causes and the reason of all reasons. You have created heaven and earth and brought out of them sun and moon and stars and constellations. And in the earth, you brought out trees and grasses and animals and cattle and birds and fish and human beings. And Rav Mordechai Sharabi, a contemporary mystic, pointed out based upon this. You notice Tikkunei Zohar says, Ba'ara, Ba'aretz ilanim udishayin. The Tikkunei Zohar says, God, you're so amazing. You brought out of the earth trees and grasses and animals and cattle, birds, fish, and human beings. Even though the first stanza of the Tikkunei Zohar says, you're so great because you've created heaven and earth and brought out of them sun and moon and stars and constellations. So all life in the Tikkunei Zohar is associated with earth, not sun, moon, stars, and constellations. That's what Rav Sharabi wanted to suggest, that you see from here, right? The Tikkunei Zohar is suggesting that praising God for living things is associated with earth, not for heavenly bodies. Okay, so if we assume that Tikkunei Zohar is authoritative source of Jewish theology, so here we have a mystical source, Kabbalistic source, which seems to say there cannot be any type of life form beyond the earth. Okay, fine. Now, of course, we're going to see that things are not necessarily clear. We're going to look at Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon, in his Sefer Emunot V'Deot, says the following. This is really fascinating. We're going to talk more about Rav Saadia Gaon as we go on later. Just to put things in historical context, Rav Saadia Gaon, as the term Gaon implies, the heads of the yeshivot in Bavel were called Gaonim. So he was born in Egypt, but he was a great Torah scholar. He was offered this position of being the head of the yeshiva in Sura. He dies in 942. So this is after the Talmudic period, but the great yeshivot in Bavel still exerted a tremendous amount of influence for the next few hundred years. So Rav Saadia Gaon, head of the yeshiva in Sura, and he writes one of the first, perhaps what we could call, in a proper sense, philosophical work. Let's take a look at what he says. This is written in Arabic, by the way, and I tried to find an English translation that I could access digitally for free, which I couldn't. So we're going to look at a Hebrew translation. It's a little hard to read, but we'll get the idea here. It says the following. Shuv dikdakti yoter v'amarti. V'shema yeshkan artzot rabot, v'shamayim rabot, v'kol shamayim mehem bekifa eretz shalah. He says the following. I thought about this issue more. Is it possible that there are other lands, other heavens, each earth, other than ours, exist, and it has its own shamayim, which encompasses it? Is that possible? And there would be an infinite number of worlds. Is that possible? It's our question. Infinite number of worlds with their inhabitants, etc. And he gives a really interesting answer. He says, I think scientifically it's impossible. So it's really interesting that he responds from a almost sounds like a Maimonidean point of view. It's scientifically impossible. Mitzad HaTeva. That's what he means by Mitzad HaTeva, from the point of view of nature. Ki lo yitachen b'teva sheyeh afar me'al ha'esh. He says, because it's scientifically impossible that dirt should be above fire. Now, I'll explain this in a second. V'lo avir mitachat l'mayim bofen TV. Neither can there be air which is underneath water from the point of view of science. Now, let's read on just a little bit more, and then we'll explain it. Ki ha'esh v'avir kalim. Because after all, fire and air are light. V'afar v'mayim kvedim. And dirt and water are heavy. Az yadati she'ilu haya b'mitziut gushei afar mechutz la'aretz hazot. So therefore, I came to the scientific conclusion that if there existed matter, dirt, right, that was outside of this planet, ki az hayu bokim kol avir v'chol eish. If that would happen, it would fall through and pierce the atmosphere and fire of our planet, until they became united with the matter, the dust, the dirt of this earth. And if there are oceans other than the oceans on the earth, they would likewise pierce the atmosphere until they would arrive at the seas which we have. Therefore, I came to the conclusion, so therefore I came to the conclusion there's no heavens other than our heavens. And there's no earth other than our earth. And our heavens have a purpose. He's already getting on the philosophical issue, so we'll return to it later. And this earth has a purpose. Just like they're physically limited in space, right, size, so too their power is limited. It goes to a certain limit and stops there. And he says, I also have a verse which reflects this. And here's the verse. Let's just do the verse first, and then we'll go back to explain his science. So he quotes the following verse. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend, who is as your own soul, entice you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known, you nor your fathers, of the gods of the peoples who are around you, near to you, or far from you, from one end of the earth, even to the other end of the earth. You shall not consent to him, nor listen to him, neither shall your eye pity him, neither shall you spare, and neither shall you conceal him. So he claims, based upon this verse, that the verse is trying to express the idea that you shall not buy into a notion of the existence of other gods, even if suggested you by the farthest possible sources of information, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. Right, that's that phrase in verse 8. Meaning, this verse is reflecting a notion possibly, that it circumscribes the entire range of possibility of existence. What is that range of existence? From one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. That's it. That's all that exists. Because the Torah is saying, even far from you, the farthest possibility of existence. And what's that range? One end of the earth to the other end of the earth. Now you could argue with that, but he says that verse could perhaps reflect this notion that there exists no other existence beyond what we have here in our existence, right? Which is the earth and its atmosphere and the sun, moon, stars, etc. Now I want to go to the science. So this, just for fun, does anybody think they understand his science here? He proves scientifically, the science of his time, why there cannot possibly be other worlds outside of our world. Did anybody get what he was saying? Like to try to say it in their own words? Okay, so I'll tell you what I think he's saying. He's saying, and this is the way people viewed the world at that time, you have to draw a map of existence. What does existence look like? It's concentric circles. So you have the earth, and then there's another concentric circle of existence, these spheres. And by the way, these spheres, they rotate. Okay, and this is a huge idea in Aristotle. The Rambam buys into this. The motion of these spheres is the source of existence and life, etc. So in the most innermost sphere is the earth. Why? Because it's heavy. It's dirt. Dirt. That's in the center. The next sphere around, you have air. Yeah, I'm breathing some of it right now. Okay, and then you have another more outward concentric circle. That's fire. Okay, you have another concentric circle that has the sun and the moon in it, stars, and all these things are in constant rotation. Okay, he says the following. It must be that description I gave right now of these concentric spheres that are rotating, one outside the other, that must be the limit of all of existence. Why? Scientifically. Because everything which is heavier gravitates towards the center. So if outside of our existence existed another, we'll call it constellation, what would happen is that the matter, which would be at the center of that planet, it would have to fall into and break through the concentric sphere of fire, air, right, water, earth, because it's heavier than the air and therefore would break through and then just become submerged into our planet. So it can't exist separately by the law of physics of his time. Did you get that idea? Now, what's fascinating?
As it relates to things that circle the Earth, let's say asteroids in the atmosphere, or a meteor, or whatever you want to call it, or a satellite, it will eventually, I imagine, crash to Earth for exactly that reason. But that has nothing to do with other solar systems and other galaxies and anything really. It's just to deal with gravity as it was understood and relates within our atmosphere.
Okay, so in order to understand what he's saying, you have to press the delete button on everything you currently understand about how the universe is constructed.
But there's a basic logic issue here. The logic being that I know everything about the world at this point in time, and that's not true. We learn from Hashem's first time he spoke with Moshe. We learn that that there are things that were not known previously.
Yeah.
So we how do we know everything at this point?
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what he's assuming, and that's a logic error.
Yeah. So I would say the following: that I'm not expecting anybody participating in this learning to be convinced by Rosaggio Go in science. Right? It's obviously absurd, but it's internally consistent with how he understood in his time the nature of existence, right? Right. The Earth is in the center, and then you have the concentric circles, and everything that's heavier gravitates towards the center. So therefore, there can't be anything heavier that exists outside of our heavens, because it would fall into the Earth.
I
So,
mean,
yeah,
we should note that 100 or 150 years later, Rambam at his time they already knew that there were whatever nine planets he describes, and he has names for them, and they saw them.
yeah. So this is a little bit speculative right now because I'm not an expert in this, but I think that the Rambam, included in this, thought that these other planets weren't matter. He actually thought these were like intelligent existences. They weren't. It wasn't. It wasn't stuff. Right?
There is a extraterrestrial on some level.
Well, we'll talk about that more. You'll see in a few minutes. Okay. So now, one thing it tells us is, so we have Rav Saadia Gaon, a great Jewish thinker, who says it's impossible there be extraterrestrial life, though the scientific basis for what he's saying is not acceptable to us. He does quote a verse about that seems to limit existence from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth as reflecting this idea. By the way, he's pretty clear by the way he sets it up, that from his perspective, the scientific analysis is primary. And after that, he sees that verse that talks about the circumscribing of existence as being from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. That's a reflection of his scientific conclusion, not the other way around. He doesn't look at that verse and say, oh, that verse definitely proves there's something else besides our planet. It just, once I know scientifically that all there exists is what we experience, then perhaps that verse reflects that idea. Okay, fine, that's Rav Saadia Gaon. So let's see if there's any other texts which deal with this issue. Interestingly enough, we have again, a very early philosophical text, and this is from Rav Histai Crescus, or Hashem, also a difficult medieval philosophical text. Also, these guys almost never wrote in Hebrew. It's also an interesting question. When you don't write in Hebrew, that means you sort of have a built-in self-destruct button on what you wrote, unless it's translated, right? Because did people think you speak Arabic for the next 1,000 years? Right? Maybe they did. So he actually explicitly refers to this issue, but he's a little wishy-washy. Let's see what he has to say. There are considerations to each side, that of affirmative and negative, each with proofs. So he says, is there extraterrestrial life? He says, I don't know. I can bring proofs either way. Some relate to how to could be and reality. I'm pretty sure that I messed up there. If it is desirably such or necessarily such, what factors would prevent from either angle from there being another world? What is clear is the possibility of many worlds alone. So in any case, he says he doesn't know. There's proof one way or the other. But then it quotes a source in the Talmud, which says it could be reflecting this idea of other worlds. And what's his source? Let's just take a look at the source. So it's a source in the Talmud, Masechet Avodah Zarah, and it says, during 12 hours of the day, what does God do? The Talmud's a debate. What does God do with his time? He's got a lot of time on his hands. What does he do? If you wish, say that the night is similar to the day. What God does during the night is something he does during the day. And if you wish, say instead he rides on his light cherub and flies in 18,000 worlds. That's cool. It sounds like the Disneyland of the future. That's a great ride, right? So he rides on a cherub and flies through 18,000 worlds. So Rav Histai Kreska says he can be proofs logically and textually from both sides, but he thinks there is a possible reflection in this source. 18,000 worlds. You see, there's other worlds. Fine. But he himself doesn't draw any conclusion. He just thinks that there's proof in one direction or the other, but none of them are convincing. I want to now take a look at a fascinating text, which I didn't know about its existence until preparing the shiur. And that is, it's a multi-volume work called Sefer HaBrit, Book of the Covenant. This was written by Rabbi Pinchas Eliyahu Horovitz, died in 1821 in Poland. This amazing rabbi, he decided that he was going to create an encyclopedia of all knowledge. And this was going to be based upon both scientific evidence from his own time, coupled with Talmudic teachings, Kabbalistic teachings, and it is what he claimed it to be, at least from his perspective. It's an amazing, interesting presentation of biology, geology, archaeology. He apparently traveled for 10 years throughout Western Europe. He's from Poland. So he wanted to go where science was. He went to Western Europe and educated himself immensely in the scientific knowledge of his day, and then tried to create a synthesis between that and traditional Jewish sources of knowledge, and to make it accessible to people. Now, this book, Sefer HaBrit, which I never heard of before, was a smash hit. It was on the New York Times bestseller list, or equivalent in the Jewish world, for 100 years. Now, nowadays, I think it still exists. You can get it, it's in print. But the fact that I hadn't heard of it indicates that it's sort of no longer considered to be this great bastion of knowledge. So it's a little outdated, obviously, but it's really a fascinating read. So he deals also with this issue. Are there extraterrestrials, other worlds? He says the following. His Hebrew is very poetic and interesting, by the way. Aval asher amarti ani, hu lam yigara olam asiya miyot bo olamot rabim me'olam hayitzira v'bri'a v'atzilut. Here the Kabbalist is showing himself. He says the following. According to Kabbalah, there are 4 dimensions of reality. Atzilut is the highest dimension of reality, Briah, Yitzirah, and Asiyah. We live in the dimension of reality called Asiyah. Here's the following. Why should the world of Asiyah that we live in be any inferior to the multiple worlds of these higher dimensions of reality, right? Yitzirah, Briah, Atzilut. And we know that in those worlds, there are multiple dimensions of existence, as is known to the Kabbalists. So the physical dimension that we live in, why should it be inferior to those other dimensions of reality, which have multiple existences within them? Why shouldn't Asiyah, this world, have multiple existences? Why are we limiting it to Earth? So really interesting Kabbalistic observation. Gam zera iti ra'aya nechona lazot hadat, mashu Chazal. And he says, I also have a very, very compelling opinion from our sages that there is life on other constellations, other planets, from our sages. Now, I'm just telling you right now, he takes a very strong view that there is intelligent life on other planets. So his first point is Kabbalistic. His second point is from the Talmud. Now, I'm going to show you the Talmud that he's pointing out.
Why isn't he perplexed by the ramifications that you were alluding to earlier?
You'll see. You'll see. So that is going to because of philosophical issues, and we'll see how he deals with that. We're going to quote him later when we talk about the philosophical aspect. So let's take a look at the Talmud, but we first have to look at verse in Shoftim. So the verse in Shoftim is describing how Deborah defeated Sisera And it's this great poem, and it says, "From the sky they fought." This is the victory song. "The stars from their courses they fought against Sisra. The river Kishon swept them away, that ancient river, the river Kishon. My soul march on with strength. Then the horse hooves stamped because of the prancings of the strong ones. Curse Meroz, said the angel of Hashem. Curse bitterly its inhabitants, because they did not come to help Hashem against the mighty." This poem, very difficult to understand. Chazal want to understand the reference to cursing Meroz. What's this curse about? Let's read a Gemara. As for the identification of Meroz, some say that he was a great man, and he was ostracized because he did not join in the war effort. This is the Koran translation on Sefaria, which sort of adds a little bit more words. But it's what the Talmud means. And other opinions in the Talmud say that the reference is to a star. Meroz was a star and not a human being, and that it did not aid the Jewish people in their battle, as it is said, the stars fought from heaven. In their courses, they fought against Sisra. Why would anybody think Meroz is a star? It's because the poem praises the stars that fought against Sisra, right? That's what it says. From the sky they fought, the stars from their courses, they fought against Sisra. And then it says, but cursed Meroz, said the angel. And cursed is its inhabitants. It's one of the stars that didn't participate in the battle. Now, let's go back to this Sefer Habrit, this encyclopedia of all knowledge. He quotes the passage, and then he says the following, right in the middle there. The fact that the Talmud says, in one opinion, that it's a star named Meroz, as being cursed because it didn't participate in the battle, Shahare Alehu Omer, and it goes on to say in Shoftim, Arur Yoshveha, cursed be those who dwell on it. Oh no. So if Meroz is some celestial body up there, it's being cursed in that verse. Not only cursing it, but those who dwell on it. The Hamashma'utu sheyesh bahem yishuv. Obviously, there's a settlement there. It says those who inhabit it. And that's why the angel curses it and all its inhabitants, because it didn't participate in the battle, didn't come to assist the Jewish people. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. This is an indication that there are life on other planets. There's a planet Meroz, or a stellar body, that has inhabitants. Now he says something interesting. When it says its inhabitants, you might have thought maybe it's not inhabitants on that stellar body, that celestial body, but maybe it's us. It's someplace on the planet underneath Meroz. He says that can't be. You can't say that its inhabitants refers to the people who dwell here on Earth, like let's say Thailand. I'm making it up. And Thailand is underneath Meroz. That can't be pshat. Because sages said, and he quotes from the Gemara Masechet Pesachim, that in fact all of inhabitation is under one star. It's interesting. There's only one star, the sun. And we're a solar system which is under one star, the sun. So it can't be the Meroz, which is a different sun. Somehow its inhabitants are someplace in Thailand. Can't be, because we're all of us are under one, which happens to be the sun. Therefore, my opinion is that there are civilizations out there, other worlds, And he says also Tikkun Zohar, it seems to indicate such a thing. Ubeperak haba de'i af ani b'muut ha'yitzurim shebahem ubriot bo yipakedu. He says, and in the next chapter, which we're going to look at later, he's going to deal with the philosophical issue, which is, what do these guys look like? These Martians, whatever they are. How intelligent are they? So that's going to touch on the philosophical problematics in this issue. Lahazkiram imhem b'tsalmenu kidmutenu im lav. We're going to discuss, are they in our image and in our likeness or not? Okay, so that we're going to have to hang on to.
So I'd like to ask the learned rabbi, and I don't
Sure.
mean you, I mean the Polish rabbi.
Okay, good. The other learned rabbi.
The other learned rabbi. I'd like to ask what, according to him, in Shirat Dvorah, which is after all a poem and shouldn't be taken literally, which is the meaning of a poem, I would, posit that that's a reasonable thing to say, that it shouldn't be taken literally. It is poetic after all. But even if you're trying to make it literal, it says it's cursing the inhabitants of Meroz for not coming to help the people of Israel. How exactly were they supposed to come and help us?
You have displayed for the entire cosmos, if not larger, your ignorance of Kabbalistic physics.
Oh, I thought we didn't understand flying sausage.
And we know, of course, that each entity which exists in this earth has some kind of stellar body, which is its sort of source of energy and influence, right? Like the Talmud says that there's not any entity in this earth that doesn't have an angel that says, grow, grow, grow. Now, so if you assume that to be true, the angels, these stellar bodies of Sisra, they exerted influence to injure Sisra's ability to fight. And Meroz decided not to participate in that, exerting that influence on what goes down here. So that seems to be the assumption behind it. I'd also say, and of course, obviously, you don't have to agree with this, and I don't know if I do either. I'm certainly sympathetic to your observation, and that is, even though it's a poem, but if you assume, right, like, even though you can interpret it poetically, but you also have to take it literally on some level. So I guess our learned Polish rabbi here had that approach, that it is a poem, but on the other hand, there is something called Meroz out there, and it failed to exert with its inhabitants, which failed to side with the Jewish people. Now, if you remember, we just read it a moment ago, our learned Polish rabbi cited a Tikkun Zohar, but he didn't explain what it was. So I have inside information. I know what he's talking about. Let's see that Tikkun Zohar, which he claims shows undeniably that there are other existences. And they that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn the many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Verse in Daniel, also very poetic. Tikkun Zohar says the following: certainly as stars that are innumerable. So they that are wise will be like the stars. For each star is called its own world. And this is the allusion in a verse in Shir Shirim. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number. Now, the word for maidens is alamot. Do not read alamot, but rather olamot, worlds. And since the righteous are like stars, and to each is a star, the early sages interpreted that each righteous person has his own world. And anyone who merits one halakha inherits a world. And all the more so that merits one tractate or 2 or 60. So by learning Torah, you acquire real estate, extraterrestrial real estate. So it says in Tikkun Zohar that the wise shine like the stars, right? And it goes on to then argue that, in fact, depending upon your wisdom and piety, you can then control a larger number of stars, of worlds.
Sounds like Mormonism.
You read my brain. That's
I
100%
went to,
correct.
I went to
So
graduate school with Mormons, so
yeah, so I had this experience. I may have mentioned this to you before, that when I did this program in pastoral counseling, one of the things I had to do was to be part of a program in a hospital, and the head of the program was a Mormon, and I had a chance to talk to him on a weekly basis. I didn't know anything about Mormonism. They believe that you actually own stars, or you could become a star, and I thought it was the craziest, kookiest thing I've ever heard. The guy seemed like a nice guy, intelligent guy. How can he believe in this nonsense? And then I saw Tikkun Zohar.
but despite this,
I'll just leave it at that.
despite this, if we would have a lot of sources by the most important rebbeim who would tell us that 8-month babies cannot exist, or C-sections, the women will die, or heart transplants, impossible, or whatever they would say. If we know it to be false, why would we put any weight? They're simply stating the signs of their time. It has no relevance for us
So
today.
I understand. So, that view that Chazal are simply reflecting the signs of the time, you assume that as a as a given, like, of course. But you should know, I think I may lose my place in the world to come, right? What I'm about to say. That's it. That idea that Chazal knew as much about the world as a smart person of their time knew about the world, but not more. It won't surprise you to think not everybody agrees
No,
with
you're
that.
right. I have a Moroccan-born chavruta, and what Chazal say, that's, quote, the God's honest truth and the only truth.
Okay, so now I'm going to say something. This is the part about losing my place in the world to come. We might have to cut this out, Arthur. I merited to be a student of Rabbi Moshe Meiselman. I don't know if that name rings a bell. Rabbi Moshe Meiselman is the nephew of Rav Soloveitchik. His mother was Rav Soloveitchik's sister. Rabbi Meiselman, in true Soloveitchian spirit, has a PhD in math from MIT, which he got in his spare time. He's also, and he's a great Torah scholar. So he was Rosh Yeshiva in Los Angeles, and I would attend his shiurim. He then made Aliyah, and he founded a yeshiva called Torah's Moshe. You may have heard of him or the yeshiva. You can Google him to learn more. He has written often in extremely strong language, an extremely conservative, with a small c, position about could Chazal have been mistaken about science. And he argues that it's theologically impossible, and it's simply ignorance for us to think that what they said contradicts science. And he tries to prove that, in fact, what they say doesn't at all contradict our own scientific understanding of things. And he's speaking as someone who has a PhD in math from MIT. Now, I don't want to start talking about Rabbi Moshe Meiselman, but I'm just pointing out that there are some pretty smart people, Bruce, who don't accept the premise that Chazal's knowledge of reality is limited to what any smart person knew at that time.
Well, that's where
pretty
mysticism will bring you.
Excuse me?
That's where mysticism will bring you.
Yeah, except for Rabbi Meiselman's not a Kabbalist. I think he's a real Brisker. I think he'd be insulted if you called him a Kabbalist. Okay, even though Briskers are Kabbalists, but whatever. Not in the same way you might think. Let's take a look at some other sources now. which may weigh in on whether or not there are intelligent beings on other planets. So let's take a look at a Mishnah in Masechet Uktzin, something I'm sure you learn on a frequent basis. It says the following. Rishua ben Levi said, in the future, the holy and blessed be he will bequeath to each and every righteous person 310 worlds. Wow, this sounds a lot like the Tikkunei Zohar. As the verse says in Proverbs, to bequeath to my loved ones, to bequeath substance to my loved ones, and I shall fill their treasuries. Now, see, the verse actually says for Proverbs, Lahanchil, where'd it go? Lahanchil ohavai yesh, that God is going to give, to cause to inherit, ohavai, to those who love him, right, to my beloved ones, yesh. God's going to give us yesh. Well, would you like to, if you had this multi-millionaire grandfather, and he said, Bruce, you've always been my favorite grandson, and I'm going to bequeath to you yesh. By the way, you ever see how kids, when they play soccer, if you score a goal, what do they say?
Yes.
Yesh. Well, if that's what I'm going to inherit from my multi-billionaire grandfather, yesh. It's a little disappointing. So what is this yesh that God is going to give to his beloved ones? So yesh is Yud and Shin. Shin is 300 in Gematria. Yud is 10, which makes 310. And so the obvious meaning is God is going to bequeath to his beloved ones, each one 310 worlds. So said the Mishnah, Masechet Uktzin.
I thought it was Yehuda and Shomron, but okay.
Not bad. But I'm not sure that's shot in Mishnah Uktzin. But obviously this passage Mishnah Uktzin seems to suggest that there are other worlds. 300, and we're going to get 310 of them if we are beloved of God, or we're ones who love God. Okay, so far so good. Now, we're now going to move on to take a look at the more philosophical considerations, and that is sort of human exceptionalism. Maybe we should summarize what we saw up till now in terms of textual evidence. Is there textual evidence that there are other worlds and other intelligent beings? The answer is it's a mixed bag, because look at the kind of journey we took. Tikkunei Zohar, which that particular passage Rav Sharabi said shows you that living things only exist on this planet, right? And so there can't be things that are intelligent life outside of the earth. We saw Rav Sadigon, who says that, in fact, there also cannot be, for both scientific reasons, because or else the dirt would fall into our dirt, etc. But then also quoted this verse, which said that the circumscribing of all existence is one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, that passage in Devarim. Okay, so he agrees with that presumption that what you see is what you get. There is no life on other planets. We saw Rav Chizkai Kreskes in Or Hashem, who says he doesn't know one way or the other, but it is interesting that Masechet Avodah Zarah, it talks about 18,000 worlds that God rides through at night on his cherub. Interesting. We saw Sefer Abrit, who's adamant that there are other life forms in the on other planets, and he bases himself upon this passage in Shirat Devorah, which could be interpreted, and it is interpreted that way by one opinion in the Talmud, that it's a star, cursing a star, and its inhabitants for not participating in the battle. And he also pointed out a passage in Tikkunei Zohar, but this time a different passage, which seems to suggest that there are other planets. And as a matter of fact, we're going to own them. If you're good boys and girls, you get to own this foreign real estate, this extraterrestrial real estate. And we saw a Mishnah Masechet Uktzin, which also referred to this idea of extraterrestrial real estate, which you were going to inherit when God bequeaths it to us, based upon the idea of Lahanchil Lo Avayesh. God is going to give to those who love him yesh. And what is yesh? It's 310. 310 what? Worlds. Fine.
So
Now,
again, once you take Malachim very seriously, they just don't assign them a location per se. I mean,
but I'm sorry, say it again.
for those who take the idea of angels very seriously, they don't assign them a location necessarily. They just are amongst us. We just don't see them. And that's the
So,
idea of them.
are you talking about the view that says that there is no intelligent life on other planets, but they
I mean,
also
there's
believe in
nothing.
angels at the same
It's
time?
not a planet question. What do they do with angels that we sometimes see? Apart from
Yeah.
the Rambam's view that it's a dream, would they say, well, they're just walking among us, but we don't see them till they want to be seen, as opposed to, well, they're just somewhere else. We just don't know where.
Wait, so I'm not sure. I just want to understand how this is tying in with whether or not there's intelligent life on other planets.
Well, angels come from somewhere. Maybe it's
Uh-huh.
another.
Okay, so
Where are
so
they
what you're saying
from?
is the following. In other words, could you reconcile, on the one hand, denying that there's intelligent life on other planets, but on the other hand, the indeniable fact that there are angels, that Torah refers to angels all the time.
Right.
So, yes, that's what you're asking. So the answer would have to be that yes, there are angels, but they're in our solar system, right? They're down here. They're not like in some other planet and another solar system. But that also touches on what's an angel, which we're actually going to be talking about as well. So what I'd like to do is pause here. I think it's just a good place to pause. And then, because nice break, we'll then discuss philosophical considerations. Right? What about us being the end all and be all of existence? Isn't that threatened by the notion of believing in intelligent life on other planets? So that will be next week's discussion, which is super fascinating and challenging. And put your seatbelts on. Same time, same place, Bezrat Hashem next week.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Another
Bye-bye.
cliffhanger. Thank you very much.
Okay. I hope you can sleep until then.